I'm Blake Thompson, 34, and nothing prepared me for the shock of finding my sister had basically colonized the cabin I inherited from Uncle Garrett. That lakeside retreat was supposed to be my sanctuary, my one place of peace after years of city stress. Uncle Garrett left it specifically to me in his will because we shared that special bond over fishing and nature. Now I stood in the doorway, staring at the evidence that my freedom had been hijacked by my own family. Before I dive into how I finally reclaimed what was rightfully mine, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And hit that subscribe button if family drama strikes a chord with you. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Growing up in suburban Minneapolis, we were your typical middle-class American family on the surface. Mom taught elementary school, Dad worked in banking, and my sister Jessica and I fought over the usual sibling stuff. But beneath that normal exterior was an imbalance I never had the words for as a kid. Jessica, 2 years younger, somehow always managed to be the gravitational center of our family's universe. Uncle Garrett was different, though. My dad's brother never had kids of his own, and from when I was about 7, he'd take me fishing at his cabin up in northern Minnesota. Those weekends became sacred to me. While Jessica got dance recitals with crowds of adoring relatives, I got quiet mornings on the lake with Uncle Garrett teaching me to cast a line. "Patience is everything, Blake," he'd say, his voice gruff but kind. "In fishing and in life. Wait for the right moment, then act decisively." Those lessons stuck with me through school, college, and into my career as a software developer. Uncle Garrett was the one person who seemed to see me clearly, to value my quieter nature rather than trying to change it. We maintained those fishing trips well into my adulthood, conversations evolving from fishing techniques to life philosophy. When the call came 8 months ago that he'd suffered a massive heart attack at 68, it hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't just lost an uncle, I'd lost my mentor. The person who'd shaped so much of who I am today. The reading of the will a week later delivered the second shock. Uncle Garrett had left me his cabin, valued at around $350,000, plus the 5 acres of lakefront property it sat on. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, completely stunned as the implications sank in. "Blake gets the cabin? The whole thing?" Jessica had immediately questioned, her voice sharp with disbelief. My mother Diana had squeezed my shoulder. "That's wonderful, honey. Garrett always did have a soft spot for you." My father Richard had remained quiet, his expression unreadable. In the car afterward, the questions started. "What are you going to do with it?" Mom asked. "Use it, I guess. Maybe rent it out sometimes." I'd replied, still processing. "You'll let family use it too, right?" Jessica pressed, already leaning forward from the back seat. "Sure, of course." I'd answered automatically, not really thinking through what that would mean. The first few months of ownership were genuinely joyful. I spent weekends driving up to the cabin, cleaning it out, fixing things that had fallen into disrepair during Uncle Garrett's final years when his health had started declining. I replaced the sagging porch steps, fixed the leaky bathroom faucet, cleaned out the gutters. Each repair felt like a conversation with my uncle, a way to honor his memory. The cabin became my sanctuary. My job developing software for a financial services company is demanding and often stressful. Having somewhere to escape to, somewhere without deadlines and performance reviews, was life-changing. I'd leave work on Friday, drive the 2.5 hours north, and feel the tension leave my body as soon as I turned onto the gravel road leading to the cabin. Then the requests started. "Blake, we were thinking of coming up to the cabin next weekend." Jessica would text, always assuming rather than asking. The first few times, I accommodated. She was family after all. And I'd said family could use it. But Jessica never left the place as she found it. There were always dishes in the sink, mud tracked across the floor, food left in the refrigerator to spoil. "Sorry about the mess," she'd say with a laugh when I mentioned it. "We were in such a rush to get back to the city." Then she started bringing friends without asking first. I'd arrived to find unfamiliar names signed in the guest book Uncle Garrett had always kept by the door. They loved it, Jessica would gush when confronted. Everyone says you're so lucky. Lucky. As if inheriting the cabin had been some random stroke of good fortune rather than the result of the relationship I'd built with Uncle Garrett over decades. As if the work I put into maintaining it counted for nothing. Maybe we need some clearer boundaries, I suggested during one phone call. Just let me know further in advance. And maybe not have so many people at once? God, Blake, don't be so uptight. Jessica had replied. It's just a cabin. But it wasn't just a cabin to me. It was Uncle Garrett's legacy. My private retreat, and increasingly, the only place I felt truly at peace. 6 months into my ownership, Jessica's requests had become demands, and my parents had started adding their own pressure. Your sister really needs a weekend away, Mom would say. Troy's been working so much, and the kids are driving her crazy. I'd remind them that I had my own life, my own needs for the space. But increasingly felt like the villain for establishing any boundaries at all. What I didn't realize then was that this was just the beginning. The real invasion hadn't even started yet. It was an ordinary Sunday dinner at my parents' house, a tradition we'd maintained into adulthood. Mom still made her famous pot roast, Dad still complained about the Vikings' latest loss. And Jessica still dominated the conversation with stories about her kids and her job in pharmaceutical sales. Normal, predictable, comfortable in its own way. Until dessert. Oh, Blake, my mother said casually as she served apple pie. I gave Jessica the spare key to the cabin yesterday. I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. What spare key? The one in the drawer in the kitchen. Mom continued, not meeting my eyes. Your father and I thought it would be nice if Jessica could use it occasionally when you're not there. The silence that followed felt electric. I set my fork down carefully, trying to process what I was hearing. You gave her a key to my property without asking me? My voice came out calmer than I felt. Jessica rolled her eyes from across the table. Don't be so dramatic. It's just so we don't have to coordinate schedules every time. You're so busy with work anyway. That's not the point, I said, feeling heat rise in my face. That cabin belongs to me. Legally. Uncle Garrett left it to me, not to the family. Here we go. Jessica muttered to her husband Troy, who sat beside her with his perpetual scowl. My father cleared his throat. Blake, we all know Garrett left you the cabin. Nobody's disputing that. But family shares. Family shares when invited. I countered. Not by making copies of keys without permission. My mother's face fell into the hurt expression I knew so well, the one that had always made me back down as a kid. I can't believe you're being so selfish about this. Your sister has children who deserve to experience the lake too. My children, Jessica emphasized. Who Uncle Garrett barely even knew because he was always off with you. And there it was, the real issue bubbling to the surface. Jealousy. Resentment. Jessica had always received the lion's share of attention and resources in our family, but Uncle Garrett had been the exception. He had chosen me, and she couldn't stand it. Those kids are welcome at the cabin when I invite them, I said firmly. But the decision is mine to make as the owner. Troy leaned forward then, his large frame intimidating across the dining table. Listen to yourself, man. Owner this, my property that. It's a family cabin. No, I said, standing up. It's not a family cabin. It's my cabin that I sometimes allow family to use. There's a difference. You wouldn't even know what to do with a place like that if Uncle Garrett hadn't shown you. Jessica snapped. Some of us are actually outdoorsy without having to be taught. I laughed, genuinely laughed at the absurdity. Jessica, who complained about mosquitoes and wouldn't go anywhere without climate control, claiming to be outdoorsy? I'm going to need that key back, I said, extending my hand toward my sister. Jessica's face flushed red. No way. Mom gave it to me. It wasn't hers to give. My mother began to cry. Soft theatrical sobs that had worked wonders in family disagreements for as long as I could remember. I can't believe you're doing this to your sister. To all of us. Dad put his arm around Mom's shoulders. I think you need to leave until you can be reasonable about this, Blake. Troy stood up too, moving slightly in front of Jessica in a protective stance that felt ridiculously unnecessary. Yeah, man. Go cool off somewhere. I looked around the table at my family, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity the dynamic that had shaped our relationships for decades. I was expected to give in, to accommodate, to put Jessica's wants above my needs. Just as it had always been. I'll go, I said, grabbing my jacket from the back of the chair. But this conversation isn't over, and I still expect that key back. I left without waiting for a response, the sound of my mother's sobs following me out the door. In the car, my phone immediately lit up with text messages from Jessica. Way to ruin dinner again. It's not a big deal having a key. Stop being a control freak. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my best friend Mason. They did what? He exclaimed after I explained the situation. Man. That's crossing a serious line. Am I overreacting? I asked, suddenly unsure after years of being told my boundaries were unreasonable. Hell no, Mason said firmly. That's your property. Would they give someone a key to Jessica's house without asking? No way. The conversation with Mason centered me, helped me see that my instincts were right. This wasn't about sharing or family harmony. This was about respect for my property and my boundaries, either of which my family seemed to value. For the next few days, I received alternating guilt trips and angry messages from my mother and sister. I responded minimally, trying not to get dragged into circular arguments. Part of me wanted to drive up to the cabin immediately to check if they'd been using it without permission, but work deadlines kept me in the city. Just let me know when you're planning to use it. I finally texted Jessica, deciding that temporary peace was worth the compromise. That's all I ask? Fine, she replied. Though her terse response suggested she saw even this basic courtesy as an imposition. I tried to put the issue out of my mind, to focus on work and trust that my sister would respect this minimal boundary at least. But as the days passed, my anxiety about the cabin's security only grew. What else might they decide was acceptable to do without my permission? Would I arrive someday to find they'd redecorated? Sold items they deemed unnecessary? Where would the entitlement end? I didn't know it then, but I would have my answer all too soon. 3 weeks after the key incident, I finally cleared my backlog at work enough to take a long weekend at the cabin. The drive up was therapeutic as always, watching the cityscape give way to suburbs, then farmland, and finally the thick pine forests of northern Minnesota. By the time I turned onto the familiar gravel road leading to the cabin, my shoulders had dropped from around my ears and I felt like I could breathe properly again. That feeling evaporated the moment I saw the unfamiliar tire tracks in the dirt driveway. Someone had been here recently. I parked and approached the cabin cautiously, noting other signs of occupation, a cigarette butt on the porch that definitely wasn't mine, a window left slightly ajar despite the cool autumn air. The interior was worse than I'd imagined. Empty beer bottles lined the kitchen counter. Fast food wrappers overflowed from the trash can. The living room rug was stained with what looked like spilled wine. The couch cushions were askew, and someone had left a pair of unfamiliar sunglasses on the coffee table. But the real shock came when I walked into the bedroom. The bedding was rumpled and clearly slept in. A bra that definitely wasn't Jessica's hung from the bedpost. Various toiletries cluttered the bathroom counter, and a damp towel lay in a heap on the floor. Multiple people had been staying here. This hadn't been a quick visit, this had been a vacation. I took out my phone and called Jessica immediately, my hand shaking with anger. Hello? She answered, sounding annoyingly casual. Jessica, I'm at the cabin, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Want to explain what happened here? A pause. Oh, right. Yeah, we were up there last weekend. Sorry if it's a little messy, we cleaned up most of it. Most of it? I echoed in disbelief, looking around at what could only be described as chaos. The place is trashed, Jessica. And who is we? Because unless Troy has started wearing lace bras, you had more people here than just your family. Another pause, longer this time. Just a few friends. We had a girls' weekend. It's not a big deal. Blake. Not a big deal. I was nearly shouting now. You turned my cabin into Party Central without even telling me you were coming, let alone asking permission to bring friends. I didn't think you'd mind, she said, her voice taking on the wounded tone she'd perfected since childhood. You said family could use it. You and Troy and your kids are family. I clarified. Not your entire social circle. And even family is supposed to ask first and leave the place clean. We're going to come back up and clean it properly next weekend, she offered. As if this solved everything. That's not the point. I was pacing now, discovering new outrages with each turn. A broken dining chair pushed into a corner. A scratch across the antique coffee table. Uncle Garrett's fishing magazines used as coasters. The point is respect, Jessica. This is my property that I'm allowing you to use as a privilege, not a right. God. You sound just like Uncle Garrett, she muttered. Always so serious about everything. I stopped pacing. Where are his fishing rods? What? Uncle Garrett's fishing rods. They were mounted on the wall in the living room. They're gone. Oh. Jessica's voice shifted to something less certain. I don't know. I didn't notice. I looked around more carefully and realized other things were missing too. The vintage barometer that had always sat on the mantel. The hand-carved loon Uncle Garrett had bought from a local artisan. Small valuable items, easily transported. Things are missing, Jessica. Valuable things with sentimental importance. Don't look at me, she protested immediately. I didn't take anything. Maybe one of the girls, but I wouldn't know anything about that. I ended the call without another word and immediately dialed the local locksmith I'd used to fix the sticky back door last month. Fortunately, he was available that afternoon. Changing all the locks? He confirmed as he worked on the front door 2 hours later. Family trouble? Something like that, I replied, not wanting to get into the details with a stranger. As the locksmith finished up, my phone exploded with notifications. My mother was calling, and the family group chat was lighting up with messages. I ignored them until the locksmith left. Then steeled myself and checked the chat. Jessica, Blake changed the locks on the cabin. Can you believe how crazy he's being? Mom, Blake, call me immediately. This is unacceptable behavior. Dad. Son, you're taking this too far. Fix this or there will be consequences. I laughed out loud at the absurdity. Consequences? I was a 34-year-old man with my own property. What consequences could my father possibly threaten me with? I called my mother back, deciding to face this head-on. How could you do this to your sister? She demanded without preamble. She's devastated. The cabin was trashed, Mom, I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. And things are missing. Valuable things that belong to Uncle Garrett. I'm sure there's a simple explanation. She dismissed. Jessica would never take anything. Maybe not, but her friends might have. Friends she brought here without my permission, I might add. Well, what did you expect when you've been so difficult about sharing? If you'd just been generous from the beginning, none of this would have happened. I realized then that no matter what Jessica did, my parents would defend her. No matter how reasonable my boundaries, they would be seen as selfish and controlling. It was a no-win situation. I've changed the locks, I stated firmly. Going forward, if anyone wants to use the cabin, they need to coordinate with me directly. I'll have a spare key, and nobody else. We'll discuss this when you're thinking more clearly, my mother said dismissively. Your father is very disappointed in you." After she hung up, I sat on the porch steps, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of the lake and forest that had always brought me comfort. But now even this sanctuary felt tainted by family drama and disrespect. My phone buzzed again with a text from Jessica. "Change the locks back now." I turned off my phone, went inside, and began the long process of cleaning up the mess my sister and her friends had left behind. With each empty bottle I threw away, each stain I scrubbed, my resolve strengthened. This property was mine, left to me by someone who trusted me to care for it. I wouldn't let anyone, family included, take that away from me. What I didn't realize was that changing the locks was just the opening move in what would become a full-scale family war. The summons came via group text from my father 3 days later. "Family meeting. Our house. Sunday at 3. Everyone will be there. No excuses." I knew exactly what this was, an intervention. Not the kind for addiction, but the familiar family pattern where everyone ganged up on whoever was disrupting the status quo, pressuring them back into line. Usually, that wasn't me. I'd always been the peacekeeper, the one who compromised to keep harmony. But not this time. This time, I came prepared. When I arrived at my parents' house that Sunday, everyone was already there, arranged in the living room like a tribunal. My mother and father sat on the couch, Jessica and Troy on adjacent chairs. All eyes turned to me as I entered. Expressions ranging from disappointment, "Mom," to barely concealed anger, "Jessica." "Blake," my father began in his authoritative banker's voice, "this situation has gotten out of hand. We're here to resolve it as a family." I took the remaining chair, placed my briefcase beside it, and waited. "Your sister is very upset." Mom jumped in. Changing the locks was a hurtful overreaction. An overreaction to finding my property trashed and valuable items missing? I asked calmly. Jessica's eyes welled with tears on cue. "I told you we were going to clean it. And I had nothing to do with anything going missing. You're keeping us from enjoying family traditions." "What traditions?" I countered. "Uncle Garrett never let you use the cabin unsupervised, and you know it. Because he played favorites." Jessica shot back. "Just like you're doing now." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I brought some things I think we should discuss. We don't need paperwork at a family meeting." My father interjected. "Actually, we do." I removed several printed photos and laid them on the coffee table. "This is how I found the cabin. Beer bottles everywhere, food ground into the carpet, a broken chair." My mother barely glanced at them. "Young people having a little fun. It's nothing that can't be cleaned up." "And these?" I continued, laying down more photos. "Are the empty spaces where Uncle Garrett's fishing rods and other valuables used to be. Items with both financial and sentimental value." Jessica's face flushed. "I already told you. I don't know anything about those." I looked directly at my sister. "Why don't you tell everyone about Brooke's bachelorette party?" The sudden silence was deafening. Jessica's mouth opened and closed without sound. Troy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What bachelorette party?" my mother finally asked. I pulled out a printed email and handed it to my father. This was in the cabin's guestbook. An itinerary for Brooke Hamilton's bachelorette weekend. Scheduled for next month. At my cabin. Without my knowledge or permission. My father read it, his expression darkening, then passed it to my mother. "You were planning to host a bachelorette party for 8 women at Blake's cabin without asking him?" Mom asked Jessica, the first hint of doubt creeping into her voice. Jessica's tears dried up instantly, replaced by defensive anger. "He never uses it during the week anyway. Brooke's wedding is coming up. And they can't afford a proper venue for pre-wedding events." I was helping a friend. "By offering up property that isn't yours," I said. "It should have been partly mine." Jessica exploded. "Uncle Garrett should have left it to both of us." But he always liked you better, just because you went fishing with him while I was busy with actual responsibilities. And there it was. The raw truth beneath all the manipulation and boundary violations. Pure entitlement. Troy leaned forward, his substantial frame intimidating in the small living room. Look, Blake. What's done is done. Jessica already invited these people. You can't just back out now and embarrass her in front of her friends. Actually, I can, I said, pulling out the final document from my briefcase. This is the deed to the cabin, clearly stating that I am the sole legal owner. I decide who uses it and when. My father rubbed his forehead. Blake, we know it's legally yours. Nobody's disputing that. But family obligations go beyond legal documents. Family obligations? I repeated. A lifetime of suppressed frustrations suddenly bubbling to the surface. Like the obligation to attend my high school graduation ceremony instead of Jessica's dance recital that could have been scheduled any other day. Or the obligation to acknowledge my college acceptance instead of focusing entirely on Jessica's latest boyfriend drama? Those kinds of family obligations? My mother looked stricken. That's ancient history. We've always supported both of you. No, you haven't, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. Jessica has always come first. Her needs, her wants, her feelings. I accepted that growing up, but I will not accept it when it comes to my property. Jessica stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. Mom, Dad? Are you going to let him talk to us like this? My mother's face hardened into the expression that had always preceded someone being sent to their room. Blake, your uncle would be ashamed of how selfish you're being right now. It was a low blow, deliberately targeting what they knew would hurt most. But instead of backing down, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Actually, I said, Uncle Garrett left explicit instructions with his lawyer that the cabin was to go only to me. Specifically because he knew I would protect and appreciate it. He knew exactly what he was doing. Diana's ultimatum came next, right on schedule. Either we all have access to the cabin as a family, or you're not welcome in this family anymore. I looked around at the faces of my family members. My mother's rigid disapproval. My father's conflict, visible despite his attempt to present a united front with my mother. Jessica's entitled anger. Troy's intimidating posture. Then I stood up, gathered my documents, and put them back in my briefcase. If that's the choice you're giving me, I said quietly, then I guess I'm not welcome in this family anymore. I walked out despite my mother's tears and my father's calls to come back and be reasonable. In my car, I sat for a moment, expecting to feel devastated. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. Setting a boundary and sticking to it, even at great personal cost, was surprisingly liberating. The consequences came swiftly. Complete silence from my entire family. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was as if I'd been erased from existence. The only communication I received was a guilt-laden message from Jessica's friend Brooke. Jessica told me what happened. I can't believe you'd ruin my bachelorette weekend out of spite. She was just trying to do something nice for me. Thanks for nothing. I didn't respond. Instead, I called a property lawyer and scheduled a consultation. If my family wanted war over the cabin, then I needed to armor up. The silence continued for 2 full weeks. No contact from anyone in my family, not even my father, who I'd always had a somewhat better relationship with than my mother. It hurt, I won't pretend it didn't. But with each passing day of silence, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It was about finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of giving in. After 2 weeks of the silent treatment, I decided to return to the cabin for a mental health break. Work had been particularly stressful, and the family situation wasn't helping. I needed the peace of the lakeside, the familiar comfort of Uncle Garrett's old armchair by the fireplace. The simple routine of coffee on the porch at sunrise. What I found instead sent ice through my veins. Someone had tried to break in. The frame around the back door was splintered, with clear pry marks where someone had attempted to force entry. They hadn't succeeded, the solid oak door holding firm, but the intent was clear. My sanctuary had been violated again. This time more aggressively. I walked the perimeter of the cabin, checking windows and other potential entry points. Everything else seemed secure, but the attempted break-in left me shaken. Who would do this? Was it Jessica, frustrated by the locked door? One of her friends who'd been promised a free vacation spot? Or someone unrelated, a random criminal? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the timing seemed too coincidental. Immediately after being denied access, someone had tried to force their way in. That afternoon, I drove to the nearest home improvement store and bought security cameras, motion sensor lights, and additional locks for the windows. I spent hours installing everything, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. The peaceful retreat had become a fortress under siege. As I was finishing up, my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. Hello? Blake? This is Henry from next door. We met last summer when you were up with your uncle. I remembered him. An older gentleman who lived in one of the few year-round residences on the lake. Yes, hi Henry. What can I do for you? Well, he hesitated. I thought you should know. Your sister and some other folks were here yesterday. They were trying to get into the cabin, but couldn't. Made quite a fuss about it. My stomach dropped. Yesterday? You're sure it was my sister? Pretty sure. Recognized her from previous visits. Blonde woman, talks real loud. Had about 4 other women with her, all dressed up like they were going to a party. I thanked Henry for the information and immediately checked the footage from my newly installed security cameras. Sure enough, there was Jessica, clearly visible, trying her key in the new locks. Growing increasingly frustrated when it didn't work. The timestamp showed this had happened just yesterday afternoon, less than 24 hours before my arrival. I watched as she made several phone calls, gesticulating angrily. Then she and her friends examined the windows and back door, clearly looking for another way in. The final clip showed Jessica trying to pry open a window before giving up and leaving with her friends. My own sister had attempted to break into my property. I drove to the local police station immediately, security footage saved to my phone. The officer on duty, a middle-aged woman named Sergeant Larson, listened patiently as I explained the situation. So this is your sister, she clarified, watching the video again. And you're sure you didn't give her permission to enter the property? Absolutely certain, I confirmed. I changed the locks specifically because she was using the cabin without permission and things went missing. I have photos of the damage from her last unauthorized visit as well. Sergeant Larson nodded, taking notes. And have you explicitly told her she's not allowed to enter the property? Yes, multiple times, both verbally and in writing. I showed her the text message exchange. Well, she sighed. You've got a clear case of attempted breaking and entering. We can file a report, and I'll have someone go talk to her. But I should warn you, family matters can get complicated in the legal system. Courts often prefer these things be resolved privately. I understand, I said, but I need this documented officially. If she tries again and succeeds, I want a clear record that this has been an ongoing issue. I left the police station with a case number and a promise that an officer would contact Jessica. It felt extreme, involving law enforcement in a family dispute, but what choice did I have? Normal boundaries and conversations clearly weren't working. Back at the cabin, I found an email from Jessica waiting in my inbox. Subject: give me a new key. Blake, this has gone far enough. I need a key to the cabin by this weekend. My friends and I drove all the way up there yesterday and couldn't get in because of your childish lock-changing stunt. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? Fix this immediately or there will be serious consequences. Her entitlement was breathtaking. No acknowledgement of trespassing, No apology for the attempted break-in, just demands and threats. I drafted a careful response. Jessica, I am aware that you attempted to enter my property without permission yesterday, going so far as to try to force entry through a window. This has been reported to the local police with video evidence. Let me be absolutely clear, you do not have permission to use the cabin. Any further attempts to enter the property without explicit written permission from me will be treated as breaking and entering, and I will press charges. If you wish to request permission for a specific date in the future, you may do so in writing, and I will consider it. But such permission will be contingent on respecting my property and my boundaries. Blake. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Setting boundaries with family had never been my strong suit. But the evidence of Jessica's escalating behavior made it clear that firm limits were necessary. My phone rang almost immediately after I sent the email. My mother, finally breaking the silence. Blake Thompson, she began, her voice thick with tears. What have you done? The police just called Jessica about trespassing charges. Your own sister. How could you do this to your family? Mom. She tried to break into my cabin after being explicitly told not to come. She just wanted to use the cabin like always. You're tearing this family apart with your selfishness. I let her continue for a while, the familiar guilt trip washing over me but no longer penetrating. When she paused for breath, I simply said, I need to go now, Mom. I've made my position clear. After hanging up, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the lake. The beauty of the scene contrasted sharply with the ugliness of the situation. I found myself wondering if Uncle Garrett had ever faced similar family pressures. Had my father demanded use of the cabin? Had there been conflicts I never knew about? The stress of the situation crashed over me suddenly, and I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, crying. Not quiet tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from some long-suppressed place inside me. Years of being the reasonable one, the one who gave in, the one whose needs came last, all came pouring out at once. When the storm passed, I felt both drained and somehow clearer. I needed perspective from someone who had known Uncle Garrett even longer than I had. I called Walter, my uncle's oldest friend and fishing buddy, the next morning. Blake! Good to hear from you, son. How's the cabin? I explained the situation as objectively as I could, trying not to villainize my family while still conveying the seriousness of what had happened. Walter was quiet for a long moment after I finished. You know, he finally said, your uncle anticipated something like this might happen. What do you mean? Jessica came to see Garrett about a year before he passed. Asked him point blank to include her in the will, specifically requesting the cabin. Said it should stay in the family, meaning her kids. I was stunned. He never mentioned that to me. Didn't want to put you in an awkward position, I expect. But he was very clear with me afterward. Said the cabin was going solely to you because you were the only one who truly appreciated it for what it was, not what it was worth. The validation from beyond the grave was both comforting and heartbreaking. Uncle Garrett had known, had anticipated the family drama, and had still chosen to leave me the cabin anyway. Thanks for telling me this, Walter. It helps. Your uncle was a good judge of character, Blake. Trust his judgment, and trust your own. We chatted a bit longer, sharing memories of Uncle Garrett. After hanging up, I felt more centered than I had in weeks. I knew what I needed to do. But before I could even begin to formulate a long-term plan, my phone buzzed with an alert from the security system I'd installed. Someone was at the cabin again. I immediately checked the security feed on my phone. To my surprise, it wasn't Jessica at the door this time, but my father. He stood alone on the porch, looking uncertainly at the newly installed camera. I watched for a moment, debating whether to answer his call or pretend I wasn't monitoring the feed. Before I could decide, my phone rang. It was him. Dad, I answered cautiously. Blake, he replied, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. I'm at the cabin. Can we talk? Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain the hard boundary I'd finally established. But something in his voice, a note of genuine regret perhaps, made me reconsider. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. I'm in town getting supplies. When I pulled up to the cabin, my father was sitting on the porch steps, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He stood as I approached, hands in his pockets, uncharacteristically hesitant. Thanks for coming, he said. I know you had every right to refuse. We went inside, the familiar setting now charged with tension. I offered coffee, which he accepted, and we sat at the kitchen table. The same one where Uncle Garrett had taught me to play chess as a boy. I owe you an apology, my father began, surprising me. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. And I realize I've put you in an impossible position. I stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. Your mother and Jessica. He sighed heavily. They've always had a way of making their feelings seem like the only ones that matter. I've enabled it for years, taking the path of least resistance. Yes, you have, I agreed, not unkindly. When your uncle left you the cabin, Jessica was genuinely hurt. She felt rejected. Your mother took her side immediately, as she always does. And I fell into the same old pattern. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. What's changed? He looked down at his coffee. The police showing up at our house was a wake-up call. Jessica was furious, but after they left, I looked at the report. Saw the photos of the damage to the cabin, read about the missing items. Then I found out about the bachelorette party plan. You didn't know about that? He shook his head. Not until after our family meeting. Jessica admitted it when your mother pressed her. 8 women for a whole week, charging each of them $300 to cover expenses. I nearly choked on my coffee. She was going to profit from using my cabin? Apparently. His face showed genuine shame. Blake, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you from the beginning. This is your property, left to you by someone who trusted you to take care of it. We had no right to undermine that. The apology was unexpected and, frankly, disorienting after weeks of conflict. I wasn't sure how to respond. What about Mom and Jessica? I finally asked. Do they feel the same way? He grimaced. Not exactly. Your mother still thinks we should all have equal access to the cabin. And Jessica. He trailed off. Is still Jessica. I finished for him. Yes. He met my eyes directly. But I'm here to try to mediate a solution that respects your ownership while allowing for some family use, if you're willing to consider it. On your terms. I considered his offer carefully. Despite everything, these people were still my family. Complete estrangement wasn't what I wanted, but neither was a return to the old dynamic where my boundaries were ignored. I need to think about this, I said. And I'd want any agreement in writing, with clear consequences for violations. My father nodded. That's fair. More than fair. Given everything that's happened. We talked for another hour, outlining potential terms for family use of the cabin. Limited visits scheduled well in advance. No bringing outside guests without explicit permission. A security deposit to cover any damages. Written acknowledgement that the property belonged solely to me. After he left, I called my lawyer to discuss formalizing these terms. Then I reached out to my therapist, Dr. Winters, whom I'd been seeing since the initial inheritance to help process my grief over Uncle Garrett. This is significant progress, she noted after I described my father's visit. But I'm concerned about setting yourself up for more disappointment if your mother and sister aren't on board. Me too, I admitted. But at least now I know I can stand my ground if I need to. She helped me prepare for the family meeting my father had proposed. Practicing responses to emotional manipulation tactics and setting clear mental boundaries. By the end of our session, I felt equipped to face whatever came next. That night, I received a surprising call from my father again. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "It might be helpful to have someone else present at the meeting. A neutral third party." "Like who?" I asked, immediately suspicious. "Like your friend Mason. Jessica and your mother know him, and he's always been level-headed. Might help keep things civil." The suggestion made sense. And Mason was happy to help when I called him. "Absolutely," he said. "I've been worried about you dealing with this alone. Plus, I can be your witness if things go sideways." The next hurdle came the morning of the scheduled meeting, when Jessica called unexpectedly. "Blake," she began, her voice unusually subdued. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to right now. What do you need, Jessica?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I wanted to apologize before the meeting," she said, each word sounding carefully rehearsed. "I shouldn't have tried to use your cabin without permission. And I definitely shouldn't have tried to, get in when you changed the locks." The apology sounded hollow, like something my father had insisted she deliver. But it was still an apology, the first I could remember receiving from my sister in years. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, not quite accepting but acknowledging her words. "I guess we'll talk more at the meeting." "Right," she agreed quickly. "The meeting. See you then." I wasn't naive enough to think one forced apology signaled a complete personality transformation, but it was something. A small crack in the entitled facade. Before heading to the neutral location my father had suggested, a quiet coffee shop in a part of town none of us frequented regularly, I met briefly with him to establish ground rules. "No yelling," I said firmly. "No ultimatums. If anyone starts with the emotional manipulation, I'm walking out." He nodded, looking both tired and determined. "Agreed. I've made it clear to your mother and sister that this is our last chance to resolve this as a family. If they can't be reasonable, I'll be supporting your position going forward." It was the first time my father had ever explicitly sided with me against my mother and sister. The significance wasn't lost on either of us. "Thank you," I said simply. He clasped my shoulder briefly. "It's long overdue." The coffee shop was quiet when we arrived, just as planned. My father had reserved a corner table, away from other customers for privacy. Mason arrived first, giving me a reassuring nod as I entered. My mother and Jessica came together, both looking tense but composed. "Thank you all for coming," my father began once we were seated. "We're here to find a resolution that everyone can live with regarding the cabin." I placed my folder of documents on the table, including the property deed, photos of damage, and the drafted agreement my lawyer had prepared. "Before we start," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional, "I want to be clear that the cabin legally belongs solely to me. That fact is not up for negotiation. What we're here to discuss is whether and how family members might be permitted to use it going forward." My mother's lips thinned, but she remained silent. Jessica stared down at her coffee. "That seems reasonable," my father agreed. "Blake has prepared some thoughts on how this might work." I outlined the terms we had discussed. Scheduled visits with advance notice, no unauthorized guests, a security deposit for any damages, and written acknowledgement of my ownership. "This is ridiculous," Jessica finally burst out, unable to maintain her composure any longer. "We're family. We shouldn't need contracts and security deposits to use a family property." "It's not a family property," Mason interjected calmly. "It's Blake's property that he's willing to share with family under certain conditions, given what's happened." Jessica's face flushed. "You don't even know what happened." "Blake's making it sound like I trashed the place, but it wasn't that bad." I silently placed the photos on the table, showing the beer bottles, stained carpet, broken chair, and prime marks on the window. My mother gasped despite herself. "Jessica, you said it was just a little messy." "It was," Jessica insisted, but her voice wavered. The cleaning service was supposed to come the next day, but Blake changed the locks before they could. What cleaning service? I asked. You never mentioned any cleaning service. Jessica fell silent, caught in the lie. My father cleared his throat. I think we need to be honest with each other if we're going to move forward. Jessica. Is there anything else Blake should know? The direct question from my father, traditionally her strongest ally, seemed to deflate Jessica. She stared at the table for a long moment, then sighed heavily. Fine. I was planning to let Brooke and her friends use the cabin as a side business. They'd pay me, I'd let them in, everyone wins. The blunt admission stunned everyone into silence. You were going to rent out my cabin without telling me? I finally asked, incredulous despite everything I'd already discovered. We've been having money problems, okay? Jessica's voice cracked with genuine emotion for the first time. Troy's business is struggling, the kids need braces, and our roof is leaking. I saw an opportunity and I took it. My mother reached for Jessica's hand. Why didn't you tell us you were having financial troubles? We could have helped. Because I'm tired of always needing help. Jessica exclaimed, tears now flowing freely. Blake gets everything handed to him, a fancy tech job, Uncle Garrett's cabin, while I'm struggling to keep my family afloat. I started to object to her characterization of my life as easy street, but my father raised a hand to pause me. Jessica, he said gently. Blake worked hard for his career. And Uncle Garrett left him the cabin because of the relationship they built over decades. That's not something that was handed to him. It's something he earned through time and care. It was perhaps the first time my father had ever directly contradicted Jessica's narrative of being the family victim. The shock of it seemed to penetrate her defenses in a way nothing else had. I know, she finally whispered. I was jealous. I've always been jealous of what you and Uncle Garrett had. The raw honesty of her admission shifted something in the room. For the first time, we weren't playing our usual family roles of entitled sister, enabling parents, and accommodating brother. We were just four adults trying to navigate a difficult situation. I'm sorry about the damage, Jessica continued, wiping her eyes. And for trying to get in after you changed the locks. I was desperate, and not thinking clearly. My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. I owe you an apology too, Blake. I've always expected you to accommodate Jessica's needs without considering yours. It wasn't fair. The apologies were imperfect. Probably prompted more by the evidence and my father's unexpected support than genuine remorse, but they were a start. A crack in the dysfunctional pattern we'd maintained for decades. Thank you, I said, meaning it. I appreciate that. And Jessica, if you're having financial problems, we can talk about that separately. But using my property without permission isn't the solution. We spent the next hour negotiating terms that everyone could live with. Jessica and my parents would be allowed to use the cabin on scheduled weekends, with at least 2 weeks' notice. Any guests beyond immediate family would require explicit permission. A security deposit would be held for each visit, to be returned if the property was left in good condition. Most importantly, everyone signed a document acknowledging my sole ownership and agreeing to the terms. It wasn't legally necessary, given that the deed was already in my name. But it represented a psychological shift in how my family viewed the property and, by extension, my boundaries. I think this is fair, my father said as we all signed. Blake is being generous to allow any use after what happened. My mother nodded reluctantly. Yes, he is. The first test of our new arrangement came on Labor Day weekend. When my parents asked to use the cabin, I agreed, with some trepidation, but was pleasantly surprised when they returned the key promptly and left the place spotless, even replacing a light bulb that had burned out during their stay. Jessica took longer to come around, pride still smarting from having her scheme exposed. But by Thanksgiving, financial pressure had her reaching out to schedule a weekend in accordance with our agreement. Her family stayed for 2 days, and while the place wasn't immaculate when they left, it was within reasonable standards, with no damage or missing items. Over the months that followed, our family dynamics slowly shifted. My parents began to respect my boundaries in other areas of life. Jessica still had moments of entitlement, but seemed to recognize that the old tactics no longer worked. And I learned that I could stand firm without losing my family entirely, even if our relationships were forever changed. One evening in late autumn, I sat on the dock at sunset, watching the golden light play across the lake that had been Uncle Garrett's favorite spot for contemplation. I could almost feel his presence beside me. That quiet strength and clarity of purpose he'd always embodied. "You were right," I said aloud to his memory. "About the cabin, about setting boundaries, about everything." The only response was the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the distant call of a loon, but it was enough. I had honored his legacy not just by maintaining the physical property he'd left me, but by finally learning the deeper lessons he tried to teach me all those years on the water. Patience. Self-respect. The courage to stand firm when it matters. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who cross your boundaries? What did you do, and how did it change your relationships? Drop a comment below to share your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about setting boundaries and reclaiming your power. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most important freedom to protect is your own.